Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. In this video, I will be discussing all of the short stories from King's 1977 collection of short stories, Night Shift. Night Shift was King's fifth major publication. However, the majority of the stories featured in Night Shift had previously been published in magazines. There will be a ton of videos in this series due to the fact that so many of these stories were made into movies, short films, TV adaptations, etc., some of which, for better or for worse, spawned multi-movie franchises that have absolutely nothing to do with the source material and are relevant in name alone in some cases. Oh goody. Let's begin by looking at each of the stories from Night Shift one by one. My goal here is to provide a brief summary of each one, but I'll keep things brief and vague for anyone who hasn't yet read them. Additionally, I will be ranking them from my least favorite to my most favorite stories from the book. Number 20, Children of the Corn. A dysfunctional couple traveling by car through rural Nebraska and surrounded by endless cornfields come across a dead body lying in the road. As they seek help, they come to find that something isn't right, and they believe correctly that they are being watched. They gradually begin to understand what they have stumbled into, but not until it is too late. The remaining inhabitants of the small town, a merry band of murderous child cult members who don't take kindly to grown-ups, have found them, and it doesn't end well. This is my least favorite story from Night Shift, which a lot of people may not agree with. The reason being, I feel this one really drags and focuses way more on the relationship issues of the lead characters rather than it does the story's namesake. Children of the Corn is one of the longer stories from Night Shift, and the majority of it just feels like being subjected to a marital spat. Number 19, Battleground. A hitman named Renshaw returns to his penthouse following a job to find a package waiting for him. He contemplates the possible contents of the package, hesitant to open it. After a time, he convinces himself to open the package, which turns out to be a bad idea. Renshaw finally finds himself under attack from an unlikely adversary, and it seems that for Renshaw, a man who makes his living taking lives, the proverbial chickens have come home to roost. While I don't dislike this story nearly as much as Children of the Corn, the adversary in this story isn't formidable or intimidating, and it seems to me that Renshaw could have easily escaped the situation by just walking out his front door. Number 18, Strawberry Spring. Strawberry Spring is a Jack the Ripper style story about a small college campus that is being terrorized by a serial killer. The killer is targeting young women, and after a string of late-night murders, remains at large, stoking fear and continuing to murder at will. The murders occur during what the locals refer to as Strawberry Spring, a season that comes once every 8 to 10 years. Throughout the story, the reader is able to establish, or at least to suspect, that we are being misled. However, it isn't until the very end of the story that the true identity of the story's murderous villain is revealed. While this story is well written, it isn't particularly original, and the ending is fairly predictable. The big reveal at the end is less than shocking. Number 17, The Mangler. A piece of machinery at a high-volume laundry facility goes on the fritz, killing one of the employees. After a thorough inspection, the machine appears to be in full working order, but the men investigating the incident are convinced that something isn't right with the industrial ironing machine. More incidents involving the machine follow, and upon further inspection, the investigators discover that through a series of improbable coincidences, the machine has become far greater than the sum of its parts. While this story is fairly unique and the concept isn't uninteresting, there is just something underwhelming about it, the concept of a murderous steam iron. However, I love the ending of the story and felt that it was the ending that saved it. Number 16, The Lawn Mower Man. undoubtedly one of the strangest stories from this collection, and that is no small feat. The Lawn Mower Man appears to vaguely play on Greek mythology with more than just a touch of possible insanity and mental instability. After making a long overdue call to a lawn care company in order to hire someone to mow his yard, our main character gets more than he bargained for when the new hire shows up to do the job and utilizes some unconventional methods to trim the grass. Although effective, Harold finds this absurd strategy rather offensive, and the Lawn Mower Man doesn't take kindly to Harold's efforts to keep him from finishing the job. While I don't love this story as much as some of the others, the premise is wildly original, and the story itself is hilariously weird. Number 15, The Man Who Loved Flowers. It's a beautiful day, and a man is on his way to see his special lady. He stops to buy a bouquet, and everyone he meets can tell he is madly in love. However, when he finally sees his lady fair, she is not what she seems, but neither is he, for that matter. This is a great story. It just ends abruptly, and after the big twist is revealed, I guess that I just wanted more. Number 14, Trucks. A ragtag group find themselves inexplicably surrounded by sentient trucks at a remote truck stop. As the trucks grow in number, they are joined by other varieties of vehicles, and the group of survivors strategize ways to escape, but they soon discover that they are vastly outnumbered. The trucks lead them to believe that they may be allowed to continue living, but at what cost? While this story is much better than both of the screen adaptations, there are a few inconsistencies, and the overall premise is, of course, pretty wild. I don't dislike it. I just like the remaining stories more. Number 13, Night Surf. A predecessor to what may be Stephen King's most beloved novel, The Stand, Night Surf is a glimpse into the post-apocalyptic aftermath of Captain Trips, also known as the A6 virus in this story, as viewed through the narrow lens of one of the plague's survivors. The story follows a young adult named Bernie and a few of his fellow survivors as they go about their business in the aftermath of the deadly virus. Bernie and his small band of survivors commit a brutal act in the name of mercy, or so they attempt to convince themselves, and it tells us all we need to know about who they are. There is infighting among them as well as a general sense of hopelessness, and it's clear which side of the impending war in The Stand that they would inevitably be on. This isn't a bad story by any stretch. It's a little slow-paced, and I suppose, again, I would have liked more. Number 12, Graveyard Shift. A young man takes a job at a textile mill and gets recruited to help clean out the basement. The basement is full of moldy old furniture, textiles, and worst of all, rats, which have been living, breeding, and growing down there for decades. The rats don't take kindly to being evicted, and they aren't shy about showing the team of men sent to remove them how they feel about their intrusion. But as it turns out, the rats may not be the only creatures the extermination team ought to be worried about. This story does an excellent job of conveying the dread the workers feel and their disgust. Their terror translates well, and King's writing is impactful. Number 11, The Ledge. In a high-stakes wager, a man must risk his life in order to protect his freedom. After crossing a wealthy man by having an affair with his wife, our protagonist is faced with completing a death-defying act or going to prison for several decades if he refuses to cooperate. He agrees to the challenge presented to him, and if he succeeds in his task, he gets the girl, some cash, and his life. If he fails, well, the only thing he gets is a closed casket funeral. I'm a big fan of King's stories that are free of ghosts, goblins, and ghouls. He taps into the inherent evils of men and shows his skills at putting the reader on edge without the need for a supernatural or fantasy element. Numbers 10 and 9. Jerusalem's Lot and One for the Road. I already made a more in-depth video for these two short stories as part of the Salem's Lot series, and the link to that can be found in the description. Number 8. I Know What You Need. This story deals with what amounts to the ultimate stalker, one that knows just the right thing to say or do to win your approval and affection. At first he seems intuitive and attentive, but the more you find out about him, the more nefarious he turns out to be. The story examines how those with power are often helpless to abuse it and will make decisions based on what they believe are best for those they seek to control, or in this case, those they love. I liked the misdirection and false sense of security King gives the reader with this story. It's a love story gone terribly wrong, and I enjoyed the concept. Number 7. The Woman in the Room. This story is a heart-wrenching portrait of one of the real world's cruelest villains, cancer. It explores the effects of the disease on its victims and on their loved ones as well. It also examines a desire to comfort those who we love and help to end their suffering, and the relief we find, hard to admit as it may be, when those who are suffering are finally unburdened. This is a very well-written and emotional story. It's not scary or suspenseful, but rather it tugs at the heartstrings. Number 6. Gray Matter. Gray Matter is not just a horrific monster story about a man transforming into a semi-gelatinous blob creature. It is that, but more so, it's a critique of addiction and the resulting downward spiral that substance abuse can cause. It's the message and not so subtext that make this a powerful story, but it's equal parts thoughtful and gruesome, so it has a nice balance. Number 5. The Last Rung on the Ladder. A man finds himself recounting a near-death incident that his sister experienced when they were children. He had narrowly managed to save his sister's life those many years ago, and now, as adults, his sister needs his help once more. But things have changed, and he discovers that perhaps when she needed him the most, he failed to come to her rescue. This is another more emotional story that hits you right in the feels. It is touching at times as well as tragic. Number 4. Sometimes They Come Back. The past returns to haunt a middle-aged schoolteacher, and the ghosts that appear to him are seeking a sort of misdirected revenge. They supplant other students from his classroom and push the protagonist to his breaking point. In a last-ditch effort to return the teenage tormentors to the crypts they have crawled out of, he makes a deal with an entity that may follow him for the rest of his days. I really like this story. It deals with a lot of subject matter, from the loss of a loved one to the supernatural, revenge, and more. It's a fast-paced and fun read. Number 3. The Boogeyman. A man and his family are terrorized by, you guessed it, the Boogeyman, in this genuinely terrifying tale that is equal parts scary story and portrait of toxic masculinity. It also seems possible, likely even, that this story would go on to become the basis for King's novel It. The main character refers to the Boogeyman as It numerous times, but this quote was the most indicative of the short story's eventual influence, as King would tackle the same premise in the novel It. Quote, "It's found us. It's back. It wants Andy, and it wants me. I started to think, maybe if you think of a thing long enough and believe in it, it gets real." Unquote. This sure does sound reminiscent of the premise from It, how it preys on your fears and uses your imagination as a weapon against you. The angle King uses to tell this story is great and provides us with a unique perspective. The lead character seems hopeless to escape, and his fear is palpable. Number 2. Quitters Incorporated. There are no boogeymen or supernatural elements present in this story. In Quitters Incorporated, a man is approached by an old acquaintance who presents him with an opportunity to rid himself of a nasty habit, but his friend refuses to disclose the details. He is apprehensive and skeptical at first, but his curiosity eventually gets the better of him, so he decides to see what all the fuss is about. He gets more than he bargained for, but he is ultimately cured of his addiction when faced with the reality that the consequences of his failure are incredibly severe. I just really love the premise of this story and the way it is written. It is a tale of paranoia and consequences with a real intensity to it. And finally, number 1, I am the doorway. After a journey into the outer limits of space, an astronaut finds himself to no longer be alone in his own body. Possessed by an intrusive alien sentience, the man's body is used to commit heinous atrocities. He realizes that something must be done to stop the insurrection of his mind and resigns himself to resorting to the only practical means of which to stop it. From the very beginning, this story pulled me in. As someone who doesn't like getting really drunk or anything for fear of not being in control of my own thoughts and emotions and body, it's pretty terrifying to think about. Alright, that's all 20 of the short stories from Night Shift ranked. I'm curious to hear from folks in the comments what they agreed with or disagreed with, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. There are a lot more Night Shift videos to come, and I'll be releasing a new video every Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York time, regular time. So click the bell to get notified when those new videos hit. Okay, goodbye. Please click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King, pretty pleased with blood and guts on top. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking.